Yeah, we're live. It's 8:14, so I'm a little bit late. It's past 7. But that's okay. I'm here. And tonight we want to talk about Y pipes. And the reason for that is it's a common question when we're talking about turbo kits. It could be anything. Could be for the LS, could be for small block Chevys, big blocks, whatever kind of thing or whatever kind of motor combination you're wanting to put, let's say, a single turbo on. The question is, how big should I make the Y pipe? And this is another one of those situations where people think that little changes have a big effect, and this is not the case. This is a situation where here's what people want. They look at something and go, okay, this motor has, this is a junkyard LS, and we've got a 1,000 horsepower turbo on it. And so should I make this 2-inch? Should I make my pipe 2-inch? Should I make it 2.5-inch? Should I make it 3-inch? And then the argument ensues with all these people saying, oh yeah, you need to make it small so that you get good velocity and you get, improve the boost response. And, oh, you need to make it big. Otherwise you're going to have like a bunch of back pressure created by the Y pipe size. And no, you just need to be in the middle somewhere. You need to do the whole Goldilocks thing about the Y pipe size. And the reality is that you need to look at a lot of other things to figure out. You need to ask yourself some serious, honest questions about your life to figure out what you need to do with your Y pipe. First thing is, like with anything that we're talking about, like, what is the flow restriction? Is it the Y pipe? So are you concerned that the Y pipe size is going to be a restriction to flow? So it's going to somehow stop you from making all of the power that the turbo can make. Is that thing restrictive? Are you going to see, will you see, like, for instance, will you see a change in back pressure from the change in Y pipe? Well, to answer that question, you'd need to data log all that stuff and run a bunch of different Y pipes and find out, hey, did the Y pipe have any effect at all on the back pressure? And then also, if it did, if there was a change in back pressure from a change in what, let's say you went from a 3-inch down to a 2-inch, because if you went from a 3-inch to a 2.5-inch, I think you'd be hard pressed to measure a change in any sort of realistic power output level. But what did you see a change? Did we go from 20 pounds of back pressure to 21 or 22 pounds of back pressure? Did we see something like that? You might be thinking, Richard, that's a 10% change. Okay, if we went from 20 to 22, that's a 10% change. Did that make any change in power? Was there any change? Was there any measurable, statistically significant, measurable change from that change, if that change even took place? You got to ask yourself that. You also have to ask yourself other things about this. Is the Y pipe the restriction in this system? What kind of exhaust manifolds do you have? Do you have headers that outflow that? Do you have headers with 3-inch, collectors on them, and then now you've necked that down to 2.5? So we would think that the headers flow enough, and that now our Y pipe is going to flow less than the headers do if you go from 3-inch down to 2.5. By contrast, if you have a set of stock exhaust manifolds on your combination with 2-inch outlets coming out of the stock exhaust manifolds, which also probably don't flow that great, irrespective of the opening size or the outlet side of the exhaust. So you have a 2-inch opening there, and then now you have a 2.5 or 3-inch Y pipe. Does the Y pipe now flow better than the exhaust manifolds do? So it wouldn't make any difference what you do to the Y pipe, because that's not the restriction in the setup. The other thing you need to look at, so we've looked at the headers or the exhaust manifolds, we've looked at the Y pipe size. Let's look at the turbo. What is the exhaust flow going into the turbo? Is the opening in the turbo, even on a T4, is that smaller than the two exhaust sides merged together? Is that the flow restriction in the system? Particularly as we go up in power and we're asking the exhaust to flow even more. Now, we know turbos do wonderful things, and as we go up in boost, they magically make more power and everything gets great until it's not anymore, and we don't have ring gap, or we have too much time here or not enough fuel. All those things can happen. But is the turbo itself, is the exhaust flow I don't want to say restrictive because that might not be the right word, but is the back pressure that we see in the system, because the back pressure is going to be inherent in any turbo combination. If you're making boost pressure, you're going to have back pressure. Whatever that relationship is going to dictate the responsiveness of the turbo, and then which side do you get to? Do you get to the flow rate? Does the hot side become more restrictive? We got a big motor and a small turbo, and the hot side gets restrictive. We're not even using all the compressor because we can't get there because it's choking out on the hot side too much. Does the turbo itself, is that the restriction in the system? So if we, no matter what we did to the headers and the Y pipe size, which is what we're talking about tonight, no matter what we did to those, the turbo itself is dictating the exhaust back pressure in the system. So is that the case? And I can tell you, having done this a lot, that that's often the case, that you can make significant changes in the back pressure in the system by changing to just going to a bigger turbo, going from a GT45, which is like a 700 horsepower turbo, to an S475 or an S480 or 7875 or whatever you want. That's a bigger turbo with more hot side flow and a bigger impeller. It flows more, your back pressure is going to come down. Your boost response also is going to come down. So there's always going to be a trade-off. But that's the thing, is the turbo is kind of dictating that. And the two biggest things that dictate what that back pressure is going to be is, one is the displacement, but I would also argue the power output of the naturally aspirated motor, particularly the low speed power output, which is a function of displacement. And then the turbo sizing. If you're wanting to make 1,000 horsepower and you're trying to do it with a 4.8 back pressure, and you have 1,000 horsepower turbo, back pressure is not going to be an issue. In fact, you probably would be searching to try to figure out ways to have more back pressure and to try to get better response out of a turbo like that on a 4.8. Long runner intake manifolds, maybe headers, maybe other methods, smaller cam, all of these things that we talked about that might help improve response. So in that situation, you'd be wanting to get more. So maybe you would, gravitate toward a smaller Y pipe, which might help. My point is, in all this stuff, when we're talking about the Y pipe, what people want out of a Y pipe change is like what they want out of an AR change. They want it to be a significant thing, and it's not usually a significant thing. Usually making the motor more powerful, making the turbo size different from whatever you had, has a significant change in power. So like, for instance, a good example of this is when we do a compound setup. So not a compound turbo, although that would also do it too, or a sequential turbo, but a compound setup where we add a blower to a naturally aspirated motor. So if you have a naturally aspirated motor, we have a turbo on it, and we're trying to spool that turbo up, and the naturally aspirated motor spools that turbo up at some rate. And then we take that motor and put a blower on it and add 150 horsepower or whatever, and add a whole bunch of low speed torque because it's a positive displacement blower. Now, all of a sudden, we have much more motor trying to spool that turbo up, and the turbo is going to spool up much, much quicker because it has so much more exhaust energy down low spooling that thing up. So those are ways that we can do that. And those, obviously, those are big things. The turbo sizing, the power output of the naturally aspirated motor, big things. Things like Y pipe size, small things. AR, small things. We saw the one that Cletus did with the 95 feet of discharge tube. Obviously, that became problematic. I've done a little bit more testing on that where we did, I loved his test, but I did some stuff that was a little bit more realistic and changing the size and length of the tubing to see if it has some effect. And it didn't really have a big effect. But you can have effects on response and stuff, when you do that, when you do those things. But a lot of that stuff are smaller things. And then if you're wanting to make a big change, be concerned with the big things first, and then start looking at the smaller things. And also, when you're looking at the smaller things, like in our discussion about Y pipe size, when you're looking at that and you go to all this trouble, I'm going to put the 2.5 inch Y pipe on there instead of the 3 inch Y pipe that I've been using, and now this thing's going to spool right up. It's probably not, because the motor's still too small and the turbo is still too big, and so you still have an issue with not enough exhaust flow. You can help it, but don't think that all of a sudden now your thing that spools up at 3,500 is going to be instantly spooled up at 2,000 or something, because those sorts of changes are just not going to happen with something as small and it's just not one of the big things. It's not going to have a dramatic change going from a 3-inch down to a 2.5 to try to get more, I'm going to get more velocity. I'm going to get more exhaust energy in there. When the turbo's like, look, we're going to spool up when we're good and ready. You could put a quick spool valve on there, do other things like that, and do a put it up on a 2-step, and you could do some tricks with timing and throw an extra fuel in there and stuff. But basically, what you want to do is in those kinds of things, like I said, the AR, the Y pipe size, and changing from some of the exhaust manifold stuff, it's just not going to be a dramatic change. And so if you're looking for a dramatic change, look at the things under the list of dramatic change things. And then the other things that are smaller change things, just expect smaller changes when you're making those kinds of things. There. How's everyone doing? Start a poll. QUIC quicker. Okay, well, a 2.5-inch Y pipe spool the turbo quicker than a 3-inch Y pipe. We got Y pipe and spoolage. We got spoolio. It's like Brulio, except spoolio. Kyle, Chad, what's going on? Special Agent Jets in the house. Good to see everyone. Hope all's well. Yep, good day. It was a good day. 3 for the noise. Have you ever tested BTR Boss Haas Cam? I have not. It's a fairly specialized large displacement stroker kind of thing for a truck, and I think that's a fairly small market. Back pressure is great when you want to exhaust brake. Yep. Wastegate control question: are 4-port EBCs max stable? Have read that they are very responsive but harder to control. This will be run by an ECU, open or closed loop control. I don't know why there would be problems with controlling a 4-port. I think I've only ever used 3-port stuff on the engine dyno. Wouldn't you want the smallest diameter pipe that doesn't lose horsepower? Sure. I want to use 4-port since the minimum boost to max boost spread is wider. Okay. Compound turbo definitely could work. Black Friday sale. You place your order. All right, Vet Kev. Placing that order on richardholderperformance.com, taking advantage of the Black Friday stuff. You better hurry. Black Friday's coming up, then it's all going to be over. And then you're just going to be crying. Would the boost from the turbo be a restriction that fights against the fuel pressure from an injector? If so, do you have 2 sizes or injectors for the power level? Would the boost from the turbo be a restriction that fights against fuel pressure from an injector? Yes, that's why that's why you boost reference your fuel pressure regulator so that the fuel pressure rises 1-to-1 with boost. So the delta flow from your injector remains the same. So that if your injector is rated at 60 PSI, you always have 60 PSI of fuel flow. So the injector rate stays the same as long as you boost reference your regulator. So you're saying that size matters. Michael, you use a boost reference fuel pressure regulator. Literally about to first start a 5.3 build. All right. 5.3s are good. So it's 4.8s and 6.0s and 6.2s. All of them. Well, 2.5-inch wide pipe spool the turbo quicker than a 3-inch. The answer should be, it depends. What are you talking about? Are we talking about with a GT45 turbo or a GT25 turbo? Off topic, have you guys seen the Z pipes? Not really an X, but Z. A Z pipe like on the exhaust side, like where the mufflers are? So what are they doing to the flow? Are you talking about the twisted thing that they did? Definitely looking forward to your small cam, more boost versus big cam, low boost. What is it you want to see between those two things? I've got a weird question. How many amps does a Grady Profix solenoid draw? I don't think I've ever measured it. X to the Z exhibit. There you go. The hooker cast turbo manifolds require a wastegate to be added. How does a turbo mount to those? What we did is we made an, you can look and see on the site, on the channel, I made an elbow because their turbo manifold ends in a V band. So I just made a 90-degree elbow that mounts the turbo. And on that 90-degree elbow that has a V band on one side and a turbo flange on the other, the V band just attaches to their manifold. And then coming out straight forward on that elbow that we made a wastegate provision. So we're using a single wastegate to control that single turbo deal. Fixed sway bar going into a Volvo 240. Nice. Is it a front bar or a rear bar? Did we talk about this? I feel like we talked about this already. Did you see the most recent Cletus video? Yeah, I did, Drag Van. I saw that. Looking at building a 5.3 to a 3. So LS1, 3.9 stroke. Okay, BTR suggested Boss Haas over the truck Norris. What's your opinion on a daily driver? For me, I think that the guys at BTR tend to recommend bigger cams than I do, and maybe because they're younger guys and that's their thing. Dan, I don't understand your question. As long as it's not restricting total flow, then 2.5 should spool faster, having higher velocity, vacating the same volume of exhaust. I would think if you restrict required flow, then no. Need to go watch the Cletus Long Runner stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. And we commented on this before in the last on the last live feed. I just think that they did completely the wrong motor to do that. It should have just been an LS, like some sort of turbo LS, rather than that. What's his name? Steve Morris, like a Pro Mod style motor. The motor trend guy's going away. Yeah, that's kind of bad. What's your opinion on the Holley single turbo manifold? I have videos up on it where we tested it. I like the way that it packages, and I like the fact that they did the cross under pipe for different kinds of transmissions and stuff. We just made our own for the dyno, but I think it works well for what I would call like medium power levels. I think it's restrictive ultimately for really high power stuff, but I don't think you'd be wanting to use that for a real high power thing anyways. You'd have to improve the flow rate, the way that it merges together. And then it has a single outlet that goes to the opening on it is fairly small, I think, for maybe for a really high horsepower thing. And then I would want another wastegate on it. Now, in your turbo setup intake and possibly even exhaust piping, would a venturi be beneficial? You want to taper the air into the intake manifold? I'm loving the 408 in the van. Have 250 miles on it. I definitely have too small of a carburetor, running lean in the top end. 14-1 at full throttle. Is this do you have the dual plane intake manifold on it? Small Chevy 427 drag race engine, 230 Dart, 13-1. When would a Dominator intake make sense? How much cam do you have in that? Neil, the 4500 version of the intake manifold and the 4500 carburetor is going to make more power. We've tested that. Thompson, you keep popping fuses on it? Just stick a penny in there, or the 22 shell, or whatever the people use. Dual plane Edelbrock Performer 2. Okay. A 7. I don't know how you have the 750 jetted. And what Edelbrock? Is it the like Carter looking thing? Have you ever played around with the anti-lag burners on the backside of the turbo, basically a combustion chamber with an injector? I haven't ever done that. We haven't done that on the dyno. Probably could stick a copper coin in there. Old school bullet fuses. Yeah, I don't think you want to heat that thing up too much. I wonder if did Mythbusters ever do a thing on that? Could you actually ignite the bullet? I know that a 22 is a rim fire, so I don't know if heat would make it do that or not. Venturi increases velocity and should look to want to draw more in also. Are you talking about the inlet going into the turbo? Or are you talking about going into the intake manifold? Like, I don't know why you'd reduce the air going down into the intake manifold. And unless I'm not understanding what you're saying, though. A 10 amp fuse on there? I don't know what that would be. I would think it'd be, I think you, have you tried a 30 or 40 and just see what happens? Dan, they did. They were able to get the a 22 to ignite. In your eBay tubular versus hooker cast manifold video, the hooker setup made less boost in power. Do you think a turbo with a different exhaust housing could get the hookers to match the tubulars? I don't think it can. I think that there's inherently more back pressure in the turbo setup on that, the way that they have their merge done. So it doesn't flow nearly as well as the turbo manifold, the tubular headers do with a Y pipe on it. I'm too scared to try 20 amp. I don't think the circuitry is going to get hurt with a 20 amp. I think it might have something similar going on the hydraulic pressure concept, like boost going through a bigger volume slow, or effects at pressure, maybe slow it down. I don't know what you're talking about, Braden. I have to go back and look at your other thing. If there was another comment there. I don't see one though. I've been saving it for the holiday. Sniper 2 EFI to replace the carburetor. Aluminum foil would be safer. I've seen that a lot. I've seen him just wrap that around the existing fuse and stick it in there. Venturi, any particular section that might show a gain? I'm more curious on what may be a location to take advantage of the Venturi effect. I think a radius entry going into the turbo helps in when you get near the flow rate, the maximum flow rate of the turbo, just like it does on the entry to a supercharger or the entry to a throttle body. If we're testing stuff on the dyno and you put a radius air horn on something, that usually improves the flow rate. Should be fine. Does it blow when it's powered up? Do you have any more 3800 videos planned? I do. I'm going to do a big bang on one. Love to see more comparisons with your port job and cleaned up version and see what you can gain, especially go with the XPZ cam. I'm not going to use one of their cams. Daily driving a car with a big cam can be hard to live with. I have a 92 Camaro. It's got a big cam, but personally I tend to get into more trouble just because the car and the loud exhaust. And then if you have a big cam, you want to take it in the RPM range where the cam is happy. And that's at higher engine speeds and where you're going faster, right? Braden, so are you just saying that you think the smaller exhaust will help spool the turbo? I don't know the answer to the poll, so I guess we did. I talked about that, Michael, already. I talked about it at the beginning. The question is that the problem in the system? Is the exhaust side the limiting factor? And it's not until that happens that you see any change from the exhaust system. I have a 20 amp circuit breaker for my cooling fan, so if it blows, I can reset it. It can reset itself. Okay. What would be your pick for a budget Silverado single turbo kit? I prefer no welding. I don't know. I'm actually not familiar with kits that bolt onto particular applications, because I don't ever run those on the dyno, because normally they don't fit on the dyno the way that they do in a vehicle. Oh, Michael, it's all good. Man. We just covered the fact that the Y pipe sizing may or may not affect it, depend on the other things that are going on. What about the exhaust manifolds? What about the displacement of the motor? What about the turbo size that you have? What about the flow rate of the turbo? What if you have, and I didn't cover this yet, but what if you have exhaust behind the turbo? Like you run the turbo into some sort of factory style exhaust, and that's restrictive. Do you expect the Y pipe to do miracles when that happens? Drag race, Urson 274, 278 duration, 700 lift for the 427. Okay, that's big. If it's 274, 278 at 50, that's a lot. We're trying to decide if 4500 is worth going to, and the performance difference of the intakes. Victor 2 4500 versus a 4150. Every time I have run a 4500 with a Dominator, that combination has worked better. The intake manifold is a big part of that. I think more a part of it than the change in carburetor flow is, but something about the intake manifold moving the flange outward over the ports maybe, or something. But the 4500s almost always make more power than the 4150s do. Remember one of your tests on headers, but it was a smaller NA engine and had a bit of a gain down low with a smaller diameter header. Maybe just NA when not exhaust flow limited. I don't remember a long tube header setup when we did that. But long tube headers definitely help compared to stock exhaust manifolds. 4500 always makes more power. They have every time I've tested it. Try bigger fuse. There you go. Because I always wondered, is it better to leave the pipe straight, piped out the rear, or dumped? I was wondering how much it would hurt to run at least some race style mufflers. Well, you don't want to restrict it in any way. And I've been told that there are some weird things going on with mufflers and turbos. I haven't seen an actual test where somebody has showed me that happen. I just know if you run a restrictive exhaust, and we've run mufflers on turbos. I have the video up where we ran a 3-inch, a 3.5, and a 4-inch exhaust, and not surprisingly, the 4-inch exhaust did better. But I think I could have done a better test than that, because it changed the boost when we changed the exhaust. Have an AR question of a 6-liter 8785.96 3-inch exhaust outlet. What are the advantages and disadvantages of running a 1.25? I think you're going to pick up power going to the 4-inch, definitely. And you might see that going from a 3-inch exhaust, and I don't know how much of the turbo are you using. Is this thing turned up? Are you running like 15 pounds or something on this thing on a cam 6-liter? It's an 8785. Is it a 78 or an 87 turbo? 78 would be more normal, but if it's an 87 millimeter turbo, that's pretty good size. But what I think will happen is if you go to the bigger AR with a 4-inch exhaust, the 4-inch exhaust is going to improve the spool rate. And so you may see equal or better spool rate with the 4-inch exhaust and the bigger AR. The Grade Profit came with wires. They're thick, but I can't figure out how many amps it draws. Try a bigger 20, 30 amp fuse. Your question is unanswerable without further information. What size are the collectors? Yeah, that's what we covered at the beginning of this discussion. I mean, a turbo kind of works as a muffler anyway. It does quiet it down from a straight pipe exhaust with no turbo. It does. There is definitely less, but there's still exhaust noise if you have an 800 horsepower turbo motor. But I can say that when you run a turbo, like a turbo LS, which we've done with a stock cam, particularly if you run an exhaust and a muffler on it, it's really quiet with a stock exhaust and with a stock camshaft. Do you think the Hooker LTSS swap manifolds will support 1,000 wheel horsepower? If you're talking about the single exhaust thing, that's not what I would choose for 1,000 wheel horsepower. I think guys have done that, but a lot of guys have modified those things to get up at that power level. That's not what I would pick. Is a looser ring gap for a turbo okay if I run an all motor for a while? Yes. Think of any electric exhaust cutouts that aren't junk. I've never tested any, so I'd be the wrong guy to talk to about that. Like to be able to dump right after the turbo on demand. Turbo noises are addictive. I agree. The issue that I might have, or the question or concern that I have with exhaust cutouts is, particularly if they're electric, if it's not a mechanical thing, which would kind of also be a pain. But exhaust systems are it's such a bad environment for anything electronic. It's a bad environment for anything moving anyways, any kind of valve or anything, because you get buildup of stuff and it just becomes problematic. And I wouldn't really expect electric cutouts to be like something that I would expect to be there for a long period of time. 78, 75, 15 pounds of boost. So that could be, if you have a cam 6 liter with a 78, 75 and you have an intercooler on it and good fuel in it and enough timing, you could be up near the limit of that turbo. So I think that probably more hot side with a 4-inch exhaust is going to help you. You need to be switching that current with a relay. I agree. That's a good point on the Profect deal. Maybe it was one of the data videos I was watching that you were comparing some builds and had some differing numbers with different builds. The losses from mufflers are so small, it's not worth doing electric cutouts. I agree. We've tested so many things we've even tested stuff where we went to a complete catback exhaust, 2.5 inch versus 3-inch or 3-inch kind of race mufflers. And I think it was 10 or 12. It was not very much. And that was at like a 600 horsepower level or something, 550 or 600. So it was not that much. It's possible you don't normally run 10 amp fuses on things that have a load on them. Example, a radio, a heater, yes, no. Or a Kenny Bell booster pump, or the power feed to any sort of aftermarket ECU. We do electric cutouts. Cool. I vacuum actuated cutouts on my LS3 Vet, and they are reliable. You can still control it with an electronic valve like an EBC. Okay. Vacuum actuated cutouts are still fast. Is there a situation where you would be wanting the cutouts you would be wanting that situation to happen fast? Like you're going from full exhaust mode into dumped exhaust mode where that becomes a critical thing? Like you're arming your nitrous system? No go on the hookers on a 76, 75. You can, but not at 1,000 wheel horsepower. It wouldn't be the one. Hookers, that hooker setup for me is like a 700, 800 horsepower kind of thing. It works fine for that. Like I said, it fits in lots of chassis, and so I like that. And it's cast, and it's not going to degrade, and it's going to work for a really, really long time. But it's not what I would pick for any sort of race thing. I know what I changed from a 2.5-inch exhaust with 36-inch glass packs that went behind the rear tires to 3-inch exhaust with MagnaFlow X system in front of the tires. It went 0.2 faster. Okay. Most people want the electric cutouts when they have street cars in neighborhoods who don't like the noise. Cutouts wouldn't be for power, strictly for volume. If you have a cutout for a turbo, it definitely could be for power. Not before the turbo, but even after the turbo. So if you have a lot more exhaust flow on a turbo out of the turbo, you can dump it out instead of having it go through the exhaust. You could potentially have some pretty good power from that. What's the most you've seen a reasonably sized V8 make on 87 octane? Miller has done some big block stuff that's done 1,000 horsepower on 87. But I don't think that's not something you should try to do just because somebody has done it. Not the turbo manifolds, the regular block cutters with the turbo remote mounted. I'd have to look at those and see. I'm not sure I've tested those. If it's their cast manifolds that you're talking about, and they're like a truck manifold, then that will be fine. You can make a bajillion horsepower with factory truck manifolds, and if the hookers flow like that, then you're fine. I haven't run exhaust on anything in a couple of decades other than the Escalade. 400 small block, 78, 75, 4-inch Y to dual 3-inch mufflers with electric cutouts. Do you think it would kill power over the 4-inch? Probably not. If you're going to a single 4 out and then a dual 3 with mufflers and cutouts, I think you're probably fine. You could find out. It's a real easy thing to find out. Just drop the exhaust. Just have the 4-inch section and disconnect all the rest of it and see if it feels faster, or if you have a draggy, or if you have a chassis dyno or anything else to do some sort of comparative thing, you could do that. Went from 8.1 to 799 in the 8th just from changing the exhaust system. I was able to get my hands on an 8.1 Chevy for $324. Nice. That's the score. Asking because I'm surprised how much I had to pull back factory timing on my stock cam LS2 Trailblazer SS running 87 octane. It does. You do have to do that in the car, especially if you're running 200 degrees of water temperature. I get that comment a lot when I run these like muscle car motors, like the DZ302 or the Boss or any of these things that are like 11 to 1. They're like, oh yeah, gas back in the day. They made a lot more power with the gas back in the day. I'm like, no, they didn't. The only thing that they had back then was more octane, and that allowed you to run all of the timing. And we can do that because we run the motor cold. No. I got to get that high test in there. You don't know. You don't know, sir. Just header dump on my three small block. My eyeballs were rattling inside my head. You barely see while I was driving. Yeah, Robert, I wouldn't care if I lost a little power in old man quiet mode. Just wouldn't want to dump the turbo all the time. I agree. It's like having a I remember riding in one of the turbos that my buddy Jimmy did from HP, and they had even just having the wastegate vented to atmosphere and not back into the exhaust. I'm like, Jimmy, I don't know if I'm getting old. I said, but that in a car that's, relatively new car, is a modular Ford car deal. At the time, I'm like, that'd be annoying to drive around like that, to hear the wastegate open like that all the time. I said, that's terrible. He goes, I know, we normally route it back in. And they just did it because I was there and we had to get it done really fast. But I said, so it goes back in the exhaust, right? Yeah, it does. That's cool. I said, I would like it a lot better like that. Some of those little motors can wake up the neighborhood. SpinTech mufflers, check them out. We've tested SpinTech mufflers before at Westech. My LS2 GTO stock was max at 22 degrees at timing at 160 degrees. What would be a better alternative to cutouts? I don't know. Zork tube. You ever considered making Roswell Fox into an engine test vehicle? NA roots blower should be easy to fit to an engine test vehicle. So I don't know what you mean. Do you want me to like continually swap engines into the Mustang? That's how I know my wastegate fuse is blown. I didn't hear the Banshee scream. did you have all of the boost also? My turbo 468 has an 1.5 inch down pipe, 11.5 to 1. Drive it every day. Might be noisy. I'm old enough to either want basically stock exhaust or bullhorn. All right. I didn't know you tested them. I was just spreading the word. I'm sure they tested great. I'd have to go back and look and see what Westech did. I didn't test them. They did. I think Engine Masters probably did. Is there an exhaust cutout that's durable enough to use for a sequential turbo system? That would be interesting, right, Dan? Just have it. You could have it on the backside like they normally do, but you can have it between them too. Richard, please tell me your house is powered by a Cam 5.3. That would be awesome because they've turned the power off a lot from whatever, for whatever reasons, rolling blackouts or whatever they're doing. I'm like, dude, you know how many things I got to reset when you do that? That's just nonsense. Do you think the sleeves I installed in my 360 Mopar would make it run cooler? Before it ran 185 to 190 on the freeway. Now it's 165 to 175. I don't know. Were the sleeves really thin before? I'm told that puts more temperature in the water, but I would want to see. I want to see a structured test where the thinner cylinder, look, that's putting out more BTUs. I want to see that, but that's what I'm told. I bet an E-gate would work as a cutout. How many guys have run remote mounted turbos with smallish responsive back housings? I'd like to size one for a 5.3, maybe 500 horsepower, but all the time. So a 2.5 inch stock pipe compared to stock. You want your boost to be like at 1,000 RPM or whatever. I've seen somebody turn an electronic throttle body into an electronic exhaust cutout. Do the motors have enough strength to open that? Are they opening it under pressure? Going through some old magazines a little while back and found the ones where you tested every small but four hit. that was a lot of work. Oh, you've turned Spintex? Tested them? Is that what you're talking about? I'd have to ask Brule what they did. Well, he's not going to remember, I'm sure. I'd have to go look up the data. No sleeves before stock cast block. Installed 8 high nickel sleeves, some 30 overbore. I don't know if they were thick enough to begin with and you made them thicker. I don't know how. It seems like you would not be putting any less heat into it. A friend of mine used planned power outages to wire all of the garage plugs before the meter. Nice. Did he have to do any digging for that, Dan? Choke cable, yep. A Morse cable, any of those. The Boss electric body had enough power to open it, but I don't know how long it'll last. It's a good break-in procedure for an LS that you can't drive right away. Running Valvoline for break-in. Are you having to run it like, is it because it's too cold or something? Why can't you drive it? Maybe it's just because I've had turbo Buicks, but I like a quiet turbo. That's the one thing that I loved about back in the day when you'd see the Grand National guys go to the track, they'd be racing Mustangs and Camaros and stuff, and these cars would all be making noise because they got flow masters on them and stuff. And the Buick would just go and then just take off. Just want a small intercooler to plummet, like the Banks inline water to air intercoolers. Wasn't there a question we had for Dan? There was one. I can't remember what was our discussion about this morning. I can't even remember. Be worried about the heat using electronic throttle. I know that the 4130 sleeves fixed a lot of factory core shifts and thin wall problems. Dan, but do you see is there actually a change in temperature from a sleeved block versus a non-sleeved block? I mean, he's already talking about not like an overboard one or something that's really thin, but one that was a standard bore, let's say, and then he sleeved that and then cut it. I just don't know how we'd see a change in conductivity for temperature. The friend did all the wiring changes at the main breaker panel. The OEM Chevys make you break them in. ECU cuts power and red line until the car gets 1,000 kilometers on it. Where's that at? Is that in Australia? Figure it's kilometers, so it's got to be something. QTP cutouts seem to be pretty heavy duty. One thing about cutouts is you want to open them frequently so that there's not buildup. Yeah, that's a good idea. Nissan would run those V8 Titans in a break-in dyno. Don't know why Chevy can't do that. Don't know about heat problems. These are all done with filled blocks. Okay. Thinking I might have had a small crack in one of the cylinders, letting compression into the coolant before the larger crack happened in number 5. Well, that would definitely do it. if you have combustion temperature going into the liquid into the cooling system, that's obviously not good. That's all on Corvettes. Let's see. Well, a 2.5-inch wide pipe spool the turbo quicker than a 3-inch wide pipe. 61% are saying yes. We need that. We need that spool. We need the spoolie boys. I was doing some research today on what I talked about earlier on the first live feed about doing what's it worth. And I was going through the first test and I wanted to put like throttle bodies and headers and rockers all together. And I just realized that I can't do that. There's just too much information just on throttle bodies. So I'm going to have 3 or 4 tests just on throttle bodies to show the variations for what throttle bodies do. And that's already going to be a 10-minute video or more all by itself. So we'll have to cover those a little bit more depth. All right, John, we'll see you. Use a ProCharger water to air intercooler in a lot of your videos. That thing is not a very practical size. Do you know of any air to waters that are more practical? I don't know what you mean by practical. Is practical, are you using that as a reference for some sort of dimension or something? Because that air to water intercooler is not very big, so it would fit in a lot of places. But if you want something that's different, there's lots of different air to water intercooler sizing. You just look online, CX Racing or DNA or all of these places have different air to water intercooler configurations. I said, no, I think it'll be so close, it will be inconsequential. It will not be statistically significant. Broke my motorcycle engine, like I think most engines should be about 300 miles of easy going, just kind of working the load up gradually. Yeah, the key to break-in stuff, when we do the computer controlled break-in stuff on the dyno, we vary the load and the speed. And that's what they want you to do. You don't want to just go out and sit at one consistent load and one consistent speed. Just vary it around, drive it around. Don't be going wide open throttle. Don't be racing anybody. Just go drive around, put some miles on it. Just put easy miles on it. And the way I look at that is not so much as a technically sophisticated endeavor for the motor. I look at that as a sacrificial thing where we are giving up, we are going against our natural inclination to want to go to wide open throttle right away. And so we're sacrificing that and sacrificing it to the performance gods. Okay, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be patient and I'm going to go out and do this so that later on, then I can go have fun. And that's the way that I look at a break-in procedure. Would an X pipe right before a remote mount turbo help any? I don't know how it would, but you could test it and see if it did anything. How is Dominator starting? Drivability any harder to tune? 1050 reasonable for a 429 Dominator or 4150? Any drawbacks to going to Dominator? I don't know about the daily drivability of a Dominator. I don't know how often you're driving this thing, but they have multi-circuit Dominators, so it shouldn't be that hard to get them to run. Looking at an air to water from a jet ski, it will, but you have to size the intercooler for the desired combination of power output. So you need a flow and you need a temperature reduction from whatever boost level you're running. From what I've seen, air to waters are a nice improvement over air to airs. It depends. It depends on what you're using as your transfer medium. It depends on what the size of the air to air versus the size of the air to water. Ultimately, if you put ice water in an air to water, it's going to be better than an air to air because the air to air is using ambient. But if you're using ambient water to cool your air to water, in the test that I did where we compared it in that method, where we used ambient air with the air to air and ambient water with the air to water, they basically did the same thing because we had enough intercooler on both of them for the power output that we were trying to run. So neither one of them were a restriction, and both of them cooled the air about the same. For break-in, I like to do an engine breakdown, a large hill a few times in a row, up and down, up and down. Okay. I'm a valve train break-in guy that involves the wall just out of the garage. Okay. X pipe to Y pipe to single remote turbo. Okay. I don't know what the trickery is going to, I don't know what that's going to do to a turbo. I don't know why that would do anything, but it might make it sound better. Used to make a couple of 4500s with chokes. Don't know if they still do. Break my engine and how I drive it. Okay. You mentioned that the larger throttle body 102 can have a tip-in drivability quirks. Is there anything in particular you can do with a tune to help that? You can with drive-by-wire stuff. You can eliminate that basically with a drive-by-wire setup. You mechanically you could do it with a rising rate throttle linkage, so you can get rid of that. You can you can learn the tip-in procedure that you have to do to drive it, and you can get around it. It's not insurmountable. I have an 1100 4500 with a choke on it. It's an old NASCAR thing, I believe. I have a turbo Y pipe that has cracked the bellows twice. That's solid brand. Joint you recommend for LS turbo crossovers is flexible. I have a double slip fit, but it didn't come with springs. We don't run any of those on the dyno. We run a solidly mounted, not flexible Y pipe that fits the motor, and we connect everything, then bolt it down. And it's probably not ideal, but for what we're doing on the dyno, it's fine. I don't know that I would do that in the vehicle, but we have run lots of slip fit stuff on the Y pipe. The HP Performance stuff for the Mustangs were a slip fit, but you need a fairly generous length of slip fits to not have it push away and come open. But there's enough room there for it to grow, and it works really well. Interchiller would be better than ice water. I disagree with that. Are the new oilless grease turbos any good? I don't know. I've never tried one. I've never tried one of the oilless deals. And we'll delete that. Get rid of our pole at 61%, going with the smaller Y pipe. That's good. So we got 2 more minutes. Cutting it off. That's it. You are cut off. Richard, we went with Max beating GT 3582. We had a problem with one. Max sent out 2 technicians and replaced it and gave us all shirts. Good luck getting Garrett to come to a shop. They actually did that? Did you guys get the turbo fix? What was wrong with the GT3582? They have contacted me and asked me to try 2 more of their turbos. And so I might do that to do testing with it. Going to be racing my van at Irwindale. I'm going to do a comparison between the 2 engines. Hopefully I'll run 750 or better with the same nitro setup. Yeah, let me know what happens. That'll be cool. One of the turbos was leaking. Was it leaking oil externally or was it leaking oil into the exhaust? Because like, could you see oil smoke? Now, ice melts, inner chiller keeps it cold. So how are you going to keep the inner chiller constantly working and up to the task of of cooling 200 or 300 degree charge air? That's really, really hard to do. Turbo sport brackets can help pipes from cracking. Yeah, I think it's what I'm concerned with more of a growth thing. Are any drive-by-wire 102s direct plugins for a 5.3? I don't know, because I've never looked at the plugs on the factory harnesses because we never run those. I'm sold on max speeding, 90-day warranty, free shirts. They come out to help the shop. You can't beat that kind of customer service. That's good stuff. I've used their GT3582s and we had good luck with them. Could a person use the extra cool coolant stuff in an intercooler like they advertise in the MX race shops? I don't know about that. You can change the effectiveness of the transfer medium in various ways. You could put salt in it and that would change it. You could put, one of the things that they do is put coolant or water wetter, those kinds of things to stop the corrosion of the aluminum in that system. And that helps, but you're not going to see significant changes there. If you put ice in it, you see a really significant change in the charge temperature. Just need to see if the engine needs more or less timing than before with the 360 versus the 408. Is the combustion chamber the same and the piston the same? Seen your intake test, but I still don't know if I should switch over to the high ram from the fast 102 on my Hitscam intake GTO. Shifting at 7,000. Then no, I wouldn't do that. 5-liter Big Bang. AC is on all the time. Yeah, but the AC system won't keep up with using it as a system as an intercooler. It can't shed that much heat. It can do it for a pass probably, but it can't run it. It can't do it constantly though. What peak boost would be comfortable running on a non-gap weekend or on the 85? I don't know, because it's not a boost level versus gap thing. That's not the consideration. It's ring temperature, and then you don't know what the ring gap is to begin with if you've not taken the motor apart. So do you have 20,000s? Do you have 15? Do you have 25? If 25 would be fine. How much should I budget to have my LS block board 5 over? I don't know. I don't know where you are. You just have to just call around to a couple of machine shops in your area and find out. Now a dish piston versus a flat top. And the chamber still the same though, right? So you might find that that it wants more timing. A small bank of 50-watt Peltier coolers on top of an intercooler. Trying to run McLeod twin disc clutch behind my 300, but it says you need 157 tooth flywheel and the 300s are 164s. Will the 157 work with the starter? Is there a new position for the starter to make that work? Why are so many aftermarket forged rods 6125s and not 6098s? They have 6098s available. K1 makes those. I think Summit has those. I think a few people have that standard, have the stock size also. Both of 157, but the problem is imbalance. Are those externally balanced, both of them? Would the next best thing to ring gap be lower inlet air temps? If the next best thing to ring gap would be ring gap. It'd be less ring temperature. So however you achieve that would be better. They would most likely want to replace the cam bearings and line hone if they're going to bore it 5. They could get close yourself at home with a honing stone at home, but it's hard. Yeah, 5 over would be a lot for a honing stone. That's not something that I would do. I would ball hone it myself, but you're not going to take off 5. How much power do you think a 4L60 could handle? Somebody else can answer that. I'm not really a transmission guy. I thought that they break when you look at them incorrectly. Summit's out of stock and K1 and one Eagle in stock. I believe 6125 will require additional work with the stock piston and crank. Yeah, a 6125 is not going to work with a stock compression height piston. That's going to put the piston out of the hole. .302, 351 flywheels have an imbalance. And it depends on which 302 you're talking about. Is it a 28 ounce 302 or is it a 50 ounce 302? 300 uses a zero balance because it's an inline 6. Does the inlet air temperature substantially influence ring temperature? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I would think that inlet air temperature, with a lower inlet air temperature, the motor makes more power. I don't know how much a lower inlet air temperature changes exhaust gas temperature, and I don't know how much the exhaust gas temperature changes ring temperature. I thought ring temperature might be more a function of the length of time you are under load and under boost. But again, I've never seen a ring temperature. I've never seen an indicator that showed me when rings were getting closer together and how we influence that. I've never seen that data. Inlet air temps and block temps. You ever heard of someone using one bank of V8 to supercharge the other bank and run it as a 4-cylinder? No, I haven't heard of somebody doing that. How are you going to supercharge it? You're not going to feed one side of the 4-cylinder exhaust from the other side because it's not going to breathe very well breathing through exhaust. If you're talking about using it one side of a V8 to spin a turbo and having the turbo blow into all 8 cylinders, that works. That's been done before. Wait, you're going to bore the cylinders 5,000. Yeah, he wants to take off 5,000ths because that's what you can take off on aluminum LS. But you're doing that by hand would be with a with a honing stone or a ball hone. That would take a long time. Hopefully, I'll be able to take the van to West Tech, put it on the chassis dyno. VW did a 4-cylinder with 2 supercharging the other 2. Then they weren't. They were just pumping. The other 2 were just pumping air. Then, right, is what they were doing. They weren't running. They weren't firing them. Straight air pump for one bank. Yeah, have a double lobe cam so every crank rotation opens the valves. Okay. Was it able to pump more air than the motor could ingest? If they did 2 cam lobes, maybe they could do that. My 5.3 Honed had the stock size pistons, I believe, but everything else was rebuilt. What advantage would I have gain in running a bigger wastegate? Well, you don't gain anything if you have proper boost control now. If you don't have proper boost control now, then the thing that you gain by having a bigger wastegate is proper boost control. It's going to ask how bad is going from 1.5 to 1.7 rocker on 300. Is it? Why do you make that jump? Why wouldn't you put 1.6s on it? Is it going to kill low end power? I don't think the rocker change is going to do that. I don't think you're changing the duration enough to hurt low speed power. If it's superchargers, I would set up as a 2-stroke. Yeah, if they put, like he was talking about, if they're double pumping one side, then I could see how it could process enough air. So it's only going to help top end power. I don't know. You have to tell me. I've never done that on that 6-cylinder with a stock cam, so I don't know what the gain is going to be. When we've done rocker changes, sometimes it doesn't do anything. Sometimes it helps. It tends to be better gain power when we've done rocker things. Normally, the gain is better at higher engine speeds. But if you do that, let me know what happens. That would be cool. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up, and I'll be back tomorrow. And I'm going to have the throttle body video up tomorrow as well. Later.